Hey, good morning everybody. Welcome to this edition of Quarantine Collections. My name is Travis Gilbert. I'm the Educator and Collections Coordinator here at the Old Baldy Foundation. And we're so glad that you could join us today for this virtual programming. For the past, 3 weeks or so, we've been trying to do what we can to bring you all a little bit of history from the safety and from the comfort of your home, while we're all self-isolating and trying to stem this curve so we can get life back to normal, back to life as we know it, and we can welcome you all back here to Bald Head Island. Today, I pulled out a very old piece from our collections. It's a newspaper entitled the Columbian Centinel, and you can see here it's all wrapped up for preservation purposes, so I can kind of finger this all I want, and my disgusting, oily, acidic hands aren't going to harm this 200-some-year-old paper. But this is the front page of the Columbian Centinel. And why it's in our archives is because on the left-hand side here is a reprinting of the act to finish the lighthouse on Bald Head at the mouth of the Cape Fear River in the state of North Carolina. So the Columbian Centinel from way up in Boston, Massachusetts, in their Wednesday, April 25th, 1792 edition, let at least Massachusetts and all of their readers know that there is to be a lighthouse on Bald Head Island. So if you're listening out there, give us a shout out in the comments. Let us know where you're listening from. Let us know what your connection to Bald Head Island is. And if you have any questions or would like me to elaborate on something about this Columbian Centinel, we'd love to hear from you. So I'm going to read for you this act. You may recall one of the first editions we did of Quarantine Collections. We actually pulled out that piece of legislation, that act that is signed by President George Washington and Thomas Jefferson as Secretary of State. We have that in the archives. This is just a reprinting. This is basically the news of the day. That this is folks in the early republic turning on CNN and learning what the latest is in the nation. So let me read this act for you once again. It says, published by authority of the Second Congress of the United States, begun and held in the city of Philadelphia in the state of Pennsylvania on Monday, the 24th of October, 1791. An act for finishing the lighthouse on Bald Head at the mouth of the Cape Fear River in the state of North Carolina. Be it enacted by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America Congress assembled, that the Secretary of the Treasury, under the direction of the President of the United States, be authorized as soon as it may be to finish in such a manner that shall appear available the lighthouse, therefore begun under the authority of the state of North Carolina on Bald Head at the mouth of the Cape Fear River in the said state, and that the sum not exceeding $4,000 be appropriated for the same out of monies therefore appropriated, which may remain unexpended after satisfying the purposes to which they were appropriated, or out of any other monies which may be in the Treasury, not subject to prior appropriation. Signed by Jonathan Trumbull, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, John Adams, the Vice President of the United States, who is President of the Senate, and approved on April the 2nd, 1792, by none other than George Washington, President of the United States, and Thomas Jefferson signs off as Secretary of State, that it was deposited among the rolls of the office of the Secretary of State. A lot to unpack here. Well, first of all, often folks believe that Old Baldy, that the original lighthouse, was commissioned by Thomas Jefferson because he appears in all this paperwork and as Secretary of State in the first piece of legislation that we have in our archives to approve the funds to construct this lighthouse. He is kind of the largest signature. It's kind of like when you look at the Declaration of Independence and John Hancock has the giant signature there. Everybody, knows, oh yeah, John Hancock signed the Declaration of Independence. He has the biggest signature. He's the most memorable. I think that's what happens with Thomas Jefferson in our original lighthouse. He has the largest signature on the piece of legislation, so folks naturally assume Jefferson must have played a large role in commissioning this lighthouse. And since they know that he was a president, they just assume, well, he was president, he signed the lighthouse off and approved for it to be constructed. Well, not necessarily the case. Yeah, it wouldn't be for another 8 years that President Thomas Jefferson would be elected in the election of 1800. So he's signing this off as the nation's leading clerk, as the Secretary of State, if you will. Additionally, you notice in this Columbian Centinel, in this report, it says that they're not completing a lighthouse, they're finishing a lighthouse that was begun by the state of North Carolina. That is correct. Around 1789, the state of North Carolina began constructing the lighthouse on Bald Head Island. We don't know who constructed it, unfortunately. There are historians out there like Kevin Duffus who are researching and coming up with clues or unearthing clues about who may have been the contractor or the builder for that part of the lighthouse that was under the authority of North Carolina. But there's so much we don't know about what they had finished here, or what they lacked to finish, I should say. And it is in 1789 that same president, George Washington, signs legislation for the federal government to assume responsibility for the nation's lighthouses. Previous to 1789, during the colonial era and the American Revolution, these different states or these different colonies acted like their own separate countries. And they, in their own separate legislation, in their own separate general assemblies, began constructing lighthouses for themselves. Well, you think with each state is doing what they want. Some states naturally are going to be larger and wealthier than other states, and they're going to get a head start. They might have 4, 5, 6 lighthouses before a state such as maybe North Carolina, which is poor and kind of backwater in this time period, and eventually will earn the name the Rip Van Winkle State for that backwaterness. North Carolina might not have any lighthouses, and you have a wealthy state that has plenty of lighthouses. So it is the first Secretary of the Treasury, Alexander Hamilton, that convinces George Washington that for the betterment of the nation, for the security of commerce, and for the opportunity to provide a safe coastline that's going to attract merchants, that's going to attract ships laden with supplies, that's going to encourage trade with other nations, we have to have a national system of lighthouses. Each state must be on the same page, and it must be a central authority that hopefully is unbiased to facilitate where lighthouses should be constructed and who should be maintaining and working the nation's lighthouses. And Alexander Hamilton convinces Congress, he convinces President George Washington, and he gets the job done. And that is today known as the Lighthouse Act of 1789. Signed in the early days of August 1789, and forever known now as National Lighthouse Day. So you might join us during National Lighthouse celebrations here at Old Baldy or at other lighthouses. That's where we get that date from. It's the date in which George Washington is signing this legislation for the federal government to assume responsibilities for this country's lighthouses. So that is why the federal government says it's unfinished, that they're finishing a lighthouse that the state began. Hey, good morning, Mimi. It's good to hear from you. Thank you for joining us. I hope you're healthy. Everybody else out there, give us a shout out in the comments. Let us know where you're listening from. Let us know what your connection to Bald Head Island is. We'd love to hear from you. And leave us a note knowing that, or letting us know that you're healthy and you're happy. And if you have any questions, we'll gladly elaborate on something for you. So in 1792, the legislation is passed to finish this lighthouse begun by the state government. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk about that is kind of a cool connection, at least for a nerd like me, with this newspaper article and this National Lighthouse Act passed by George Washington in 1789, has to do with the publisher. So up the top here, see there, Columbian Centinel. Down below here, I can't get it close enough to the camera to notice, but it says that this is printed and published on Wednesdays and Saturdays by Benjamin Russell in Boston, Massachusetts. Benjamin Russell is a very important figure in the early political parties or political factions of the United States of America. He was what we call a Federalist. And in this time period, rather than Democrats, rather than Republicans, we had Federalists and we had Anti-Federalists. In fact, in 1792, when this edition of the Columbian Centinel is published, it is the birth of political parties as we know them today in America. George Washington arguably is the only president in United States history that does not assume a political party. He remains kind of above the fray. But we're going to learn he definitely leaned towards one political party, regardless of whether he professed professed enjoying that political party. Says, hey Travis, oh Mackie, sorry I got two emails at once there. Abby's trying to get a hold of me now, and Mackie, hey Travis, thanks again for all you do at Old Baldy, for the fun, informative, historic happy hour last night. Mackie, that happy hour went so well. Thank you for that kind word. And Kira, I saw a message from you this morning. I'm so sorry, Kira, that our technology failed in sending or delivering to your inbox the information on how to get into that happy hour. I'm so sorry that we missed you, Kira. We're going to get back to you today. But yes, Mackie, that happy hour went very well. I was, it was a little kind of artsy. I have an art history minor. A lot of folks are not aware of that. My background has a lot to do with art history. And now it seems like a lifetime ago. I'm supposed to have my college fifth year reunion in June. Let's see if that happens or not. I can't believe it's been 5 years. You think freshman year it's been, 9 years, almost a decade since I've been out of school. But little old Travis as a freshman just adored art history. I have no talent to draw or to paint or to play the piano like Abby can, but I love and appreciate art. And I had been trying so hard at my previous job at the Historical Society in Wilmington, and then when I came down here, to try to incorporate art history into the material that I was being provided at these jobs. And I nailed it last night. I finally found a way to pull in art history in a albeit kind of artsy way of sorts. Perhaps I convinced some people of my theory. Perhaps I did not convince some other people. McCallie is always pushing me. I really appreciate her. She's constantly pushing me to think and to adapt and to improve upon that theory. But Mackie, the light bulb went off in so many different people, and I could tell through your questions and your comments and your emails, and Mackie, you were definitely one of them. So thank you for joining us and for your kind words and really showing me that I was effectively communicating what I was trying to say last night. So it was a lot of fun, and I'll let you know I may have a little bit of a headache right now based on how much fun we were having last night. Thus the Gatorade. Secret, McCallie and Mackie and Kara, all yous out there, so don't tell anybody. So back to this last point I wanted to make by pulling out the Columbian Centinel. It is in 1792, when they're publishing this information about the Bald Head Lighthouse, while the original lighthouse is being constructed, and when the nation assumes responsibility for the nation's lighthouses, political parties as we know it are created and formed. But they are not Democrat and they are not Republican. They are Federalists and Anti-Federalists. Those Anti-Federalists, soon to be known as Democratic Republicans. And it has everything to do with the nation's lighthouses. Everything to do with the nation's lighthouses. And everything to do with Benjamin Russell, who publishes the Columbian Centinel. You see, the Federalists were led by Alexander Hamilton, and he championed assuming federal responsibility for these nation's lighthouses. And the Federalists saw the government, the federal government that is, as a vehicle in order to increase trade, to promote economic prosperity. They saw the federal government's responsibility and the federal government's role to be active in their citizens' lives, to be intimate with the American Republic, to use the federal government, to use its authority, to use its logistics, to use its offices, to spur growth, to spur this trade. And how else are you going to do that than, as we discussed, by lighting up the nation's coastline to attract these vessels from across the nation? So how could you be against that, you might ask? How could the Anti-Federalists or the Democratic Republicans be against a lighthouse? I mean, a lighthouse is so apolitical. How could a lighthouse be controversial? Emmeline, still pondering the Southern Gothic. Dan and Emmeline, hey, thank you. Well, I'm glad you're still pondering, and I'm glad you slept on it all. It's good to hear from you, Dan and Emmeline. Again, more kind folks that have been so very kind to me the past few weeks through this endeavor to try to reach out. So Dan and Emmeline, thank you for joining us this morning, and thank you for joining us last night. So again, how could the Anti-Federalists be against something so apolitical as a lighthouse? Well, the Democratic Republicans, led by Thomas Jefferson, they were jealous of their liberties. And they thought, step by step, piece by piece, if you allow the federal government to assume more responsibilities, it's going to be a slippery slope. First, it's a lighthouse. Next, it's a bank. Next, it's your guns. Next, maybe they're going to take away your religion. They wanted to stem this federal encroachment. They wanted to stem this increased government size from the start, and avoid this slippery slope that they were sure that was going to happen. Piece by piece, federal government assuming more responsibilities and taking away more of these liberties that, remember, they had just fought a war over and died for these liberties. So it wasn't like Thomas Jefferson was against lighthouses. Of course not. No. I mean, Virginia was, they had navigational aids at least. So he wasn't against lighthouses. He was just against the federal government assuming responsibility for the nation's lighthouses. He wanted the states to have this obligation and the states' responsibility. Because additionally, think like Thomas Jefferson. As I was saying earlier, state by state, you allow the states to facilitate the lighthouses. A rich state such as Pennsylvania or New York, not Pennsylvania, is landlocked. Well, at least they had the Delaware River. But let's say New York, for example. That rich, very wealthy state, is going to have money for tons of lighthouses. Thomas Jefferson says, let them pay for their lighthouses. Why should you tax a citizen that's living in a landlocked state to raise money to build a lighthouse? Should it not naturally be the responsibility of these states that have coastlines to raise the money via taxes and tariffs to build the lighthouses. Why should you punish a new state like Ohio or Kentucky that has no coastline? Think like Jefferson? Hopefully it's starting to click for you all. Well, Alexander Hamilton obviously succeeded in winning that argument. The Federalists, which George Washington definitely leaned towards the Federalists, even when he leaves office in his famous farewell address that most folks believe was ghost-written by Alexander Hamilton. In that farewell address, Thomas Jefferson pleads with his fellow citizens. He says, please do not, tumble into this factionalism. Please do not start political parties. The nation is not going to benefit from political parties. But even with all that words and even with all that rhetoric, George Washington absolutely leaned towards the Federalists. And because of his leanings, because of Alexander Hamilton's amazing ability to convince folks, he is a very convincing writer and a very convincing orator, he was able to get the National Lighthouse Act passed against Thomas Jefferson and other anti-federalists' wishes. And that would play a role in the great political revolution of 1800, when Federalists lose their political power, never to come back onto the scene, never again to elect a president. And these Democratic Republicans under Jefferson are going to inaugurate, oh my goodness, a good chunk of time, a good, at least 20 years of political power, really largely facilitated through a series of Democratic Republican presidents like Jefferson and Madison and Monroe. So Benjamin Russell was a leading Federalist. So it makes sense that he would publish this act to build a lighthouse. It was certainly in the Federalist platform, if you will. We still have political platforms today. And this idea that today our press is very partisan. You think, some folks tune in to CNN and there are folks that tune in to Fox News. Well, it was the same way. The Columbian Centinel was a very, very Federalist newspaper. It published things that promoted the Federalist platform, such as lighthouses, as you see on the front page. But it also published editorials that were very damning of the anti-Federalists or the Democratic Republicans. So this concept that our press today is somehow more partisan than it used to be is simply just not correct. It was just as partisan when Benjamin Russell, a leading Federalist from Boston, is publishing the Columbian Centinel, as it is when you turn on the cable news networks today. And Boston, of course, is a hotbed for Federalist activity. The Federalists tended to kind of congregate up in the New England states in the north, and the Democratic Republicans or the anti-Federalists tended to concentrate in the American South. But of course, there were anti-Federalists in the North and there were Federalists in the South. Each of these individual state governments had a very robust conversation and dialogue and partisanship in between these two political parties, again at a state level, and North Carolina was no different. Michelle, hello from Wrightsville Beach. Man, do I miss me some Wrightsville Beach, Michelle. So lucky. I hope that you're able to walk the loop and hopefully you can see the beach or one of the waterways from where you are. I know the beaches are closed up there. Man, I miss Wrightsville Beach. That might be one of first of many stops when we are all given the go-ahead to leave our homes or to leave wherever we've decided to quarantine. So thanks for checking in, Michelle. I'm going to wrap up here, folks. If you're out there listening, give me a shout out in the comments. Let us know where you're listening from, what your connection to Bald Head Island is. We'd love to hear from you. So as we discussed yesterday in previous episodes, what became of this lighthouse? Well, it was finished by a man named Abishai Woodward from New London, Connecticut. I have a hunch that Abishai was a Federalist as well. I know that Jedediah Huntington, who recommended that Abishai get the job to complete the lighthouse, was a Federalist. And he had to convince his boss, Alexander Hamilton, the leading Federalist in the nation, that Abishai should get this job. So again, it's as Mackie was saying, I think yesterday, it's not about what you know, it's about who you know. And that certainly is the case on the early years of the lighthouse service. So Abishai comes down and he completes Bald Head Island's first lighthouse. Additionally, it is North Carolina's first lighthouse as well. It is one of the first lighthouses in the American South. There are a few that predate her. But by 1813, due to the hydrology of the Cape Fear River and the opening of a new inlet to the north of Bald Head Island, slowly but surely the beach and the ocean began encroaching on that original lighthouse. And by the year 1813, it is decided to deconstruct that lighthouse, to recycle the brick and to recycle the lantern room, and use those recycled materials to begin again. And that is what we all know as Old Baldy Lighthouse today. So thank you for joining us this morning, and check out our website. Our online store has all kinds of great things to keep you busy, to keep your mind working during this pandemic. We've got some books, Easter's around the corner, Passover's around the corner. So we have all kinds of really great objects. See, this is me being a museum nerd. Objects. I'm sure Jess would not appreciate me calling her fine apparel objects. But we got apparel, some really great things for gifts, pottery by Melissa Reddick. Lots of great things in that online store since you can't visit our gift shop in person. And when you shop on that online store, you are supporting a great cause, which is the continuing efforts of all of this team here to support the lighthouse, to keep her standing for generations to come, and to interpret this beautiful story that I had the pleasure of talking about. All right, speaking of Southern, Dukes or Hellmans? Emmeline, Dukes all the way. Dukes all the way. Absolutely. That is not even a question. And the other question you might ask, Chapel Hill all the way. I'm not a Duke fan. So Duke, Mayo, and definitely UNC, Emmeline. So there you go. But I got to be honest, I love North Carolina. And I'm not just trying to, get on your good side, Emmeline. Virginia is my favorite Southern state. The good old Virginia, and her tidewater and her mountains are so dear to my heart. Specifically, Loudoun County, Virginia, is probably my favorite place in the world. Loudoun County, Virginia. I'm thinking Aldi. I'm thinking Loudoun Heights. Middletown, anything about west of Leesburg. But I digress there, Emmeline. Maybe we're learning about each other. So I don't know. Let me know. Is it Duke or is it Hellman's household up there outside Charlottesville? And Mimi, we love knowing you. That's so sweet, Mimi. I'm glad that I got to meet you and have you in my life. Thank you for doing this fascinating history. And Fairfax County, Michelle. Well, I used to like Fairfax County. Manassas is a great battlefield and area, but it's just gotten too big and too crowded nowadays, Michelle. I mean, the Fairfax County that I remember, see, I'm young, but I'm old enough to play this game of I remember when. And I remember when Fairfax County was kind of nice. Downtown Fairfax Courthouse was a beautiful area. Manassas is beautiful. But it just is now so busy and so metropolitan. I really can't stand it anymore. So I got to go a little further out west to Loudoun County or a little more south down towards Fredericksburg to enjoy it. You moved from Centerville. Yeah, I know Centerville very, very well. Not close, right over the old stone bridge from Manassas. So yeah, Centerville was really. I hear you. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's probably why you made me move down here. I get that a lot when I meet people that are from Nova. That's the first thing out of their mouths. They're like, "Yeah, I moved down here." Mimi, you know Loudoun County too. Get out of here, Mimi. Did you live up there? It's funny about that. So I was just above that town, and it was on my birthday last year. Now we're just talking, but I got to tell this story. I'm a storyteller. I was on my way for my birthday last year, and I always get off of 95 in Fredericksburg and take 17 or 15 or whatnot up and through the mountains, through the Manassas Gap and Thoroughfare Gap and all that, just because it's more beautiful and you avoid that mess of Fairfax County that Michelle was just speaking about. And I knew I was getting low on gas, but I was sure that above Aldi there was a gas station. I knew exactly the gas station I was thinking of, and of course there is a cavalry battlefield. There are actually several cavalry battlefields near there. And what do? I decide that I'm so excited to go to the cavalry battlefield that I'm going to skip the gas station. I'm going to wait for this phantom gas station ahead that I was sure of. And not only am I going to skip gas, I'm going to go out of my way and travel additional miles to get to this monument it's right alongside, I think it's 17, and it's to the 5th Massachusetts Cavalry Regiment, which was just decimated at a battle there on the road to Gettysburg in June of 1863. I found the monument. I did not find the gas station because it was a figment of my imagination. And I ran out of gas. It was the only time I've ever done this. Was last year, and I literally was alongside the road and ran out of gas. And I don't even know if I crossed the border into Loudoun County let me just say that AAA, it took a minute for them to find where I was out there on the sticks. So that was a lesson to probably skip the battlefield you've seen 100 times and go to the first gas station you see. A lesson I'm going to keep with me. You can imagine what I look like in 90-degree weather in Virginia, sitting along the road. And of course, all those nice Virginians up there, everybody had to stop and be like, "Do I need some help? What's wrong?" And I had to embarrassingly admit to everybody, I have run out of gas. It's like here on Baldhead when you run out of juice in your golf cart. Oh my gosh, I have really gone way, way off course. So, hey folks, thank you for joining us. Thank you for Michelle and Mimi and Dan and Emmeline for just a little bit of small talk here. It's really fun to get to know some of you out there. So we'll see you this afternoon for another edition of Touring with Travis. Thanks, folks, and you have a great day. Stay healthy and stay positive.